What happens when ancient myths collide with modern science? In this video, we dive into the fascinating crossroads where legend meets logic, exploring stories passed down through generations and the discoveries that now echo their truths. From global flood tales to cosmic creation myths, science is uncovering surprising parallels hidden in the symbols of the past. Could our ancestors have known more than we give them credit for? Or are myths simply poetic reflections of natural phenomena? Join us as we decode the mysteries at the intersection of faith, folklore, and fact in When Myths Meet Science. For centuries, myths have been dismissed as mere superstition, stories spun by ancient peoples to explain a world they didn't yet understand. Science, in contrast, has been hailed as the rational force that dispels those myths with facts, evidence, and logic. But what happens when the boundaries between these two worlds begin to blur? In recent decades, researchers have uncovered surprising parallels between ancient myths and modern scientific discoveries. From global flood stories and forgotten civilizations to encoded astronomical knowledge and genetic memory, science is beginning to shed light on the deeper truths hidden within humanity's most ancient tales. The result is a fascinating fusion of imagination and investigation, a reminder that myth and science are not always at odds, but may, in fact, be complementary ways of understanding our world. The purpose of myth. Before diving into specific examples, it's important to understand what a myth is. Myths are not just fantastical stories, they are cultural blueprints. They encode the values, fears, hopes, and knowledge of a people. In traditional societies, myths serve to explain natural phenomena, teach moral lessons, preserve history, and shape identity. While some myths may seem fanciful, many contain metaphorical truths and even historical echoes. What may appear as symbolic language can often hold real-world significance, especially when interpreted through the lens of science. The Great Flood. Global myth, geological memory? One of the most pervasive myths across human civilizations is the story of a great flood. From the Mesopotamian epic of Gilgamesh to the biblical account of Noah, from Hindu tales of Manu to Native American legends, the motif of a cataclysmic deluge that resets humanity is nearly universal. For a long time, scholars viewed these flood stories as symbolic representations of renewal or divine punishment. But geology tells a compelling story. Around 12,000 years ago, at the end of the last ice age, melting glaciers caused sea levels to rise dramatically by as much as 400 feet. Entire coastlines and civilizations would have been swallowed by water. Some scientists also point to a sudden influx of Mediterranean water into the Black Sea basin around 5,600 BCE, potentially inspiring the Noah and Gilgamesh flood narratives. Underwater archaeology in the Mediterranean and around the world has revealed submerged cities and structures that lend weight to these ancient accounts. While the mythological details vary, the memory of a massive flood may be a preserved cultural echo of real environmental upheaval. Lost civilizations and ancient knowledge. Many myths speak of lost golden ages, civilizations blessed with advanced knowledge that fell due to pride, catastrophe, or divine judgment. Atlantis is perhaps the most famous example, described by Plato as an advanced island civilization that sank into the sea. For centuries, Atlantis was considered fiction. But modern discoveries of sophisticated prehistoric structures, like Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, dated to around 9,600 BCE, have challenged the linear narrative of human progress. This site predates Stonehenge and the Egyptian pyramids by millennia, yet displays extraordinary engineering, astronomical alignment, and artistic expression. Similar mysteries surround the megalithic architecture of South America, the Indus Valley, and Southeast Asia. While these don't prove the existence of Atlantis per se, they do suggest that ancient peoples possessed complex knowledge that was lost and forgotten, echoes of which may survive in the myth of lost civilizations. Star maps and stone, myth and astronomy. Many ancient myths involve the stars, constellations that represent gods, heroes, or monsters. But what if these weren't just stories told for entertainment? What if they were encoded astronomical systems? The Aboriginal Australians' Dreamtime stories align with celestial events and cycles. The Dogon people of Mali have long been said to possess knowledge of the Sirius star system, including details about a companion star invisible to the naked eye, which they claimed was passed down from ancestors or sky beings. While this claim remains debated, it illustrates the wider pattern. Ancient cultures had detailed and often accurate star maps embedded in their myths. Consider also the pyramids of Egypt, the Mayan temples, and Stonehenge, all of which align with solstices, equinoxes, and stellar constellations. These weren't random placements. They reflect an intricate understanding of celestial mechanics passed down through ritual, story, and myth. Creation stories and the Big Bang. Many cultures have creation myths that describe the universe emerging from darkness, chaos, or a cosmic egg. In Hinduism, the universe begins with a sound, Om, that brings order from the void. In the Bible, God speaks the universe into being. Let there be light. Science, too, has a creation story, the Big Bang. It describes the universe emerging from a singularity in a sudden burst of energy and light. While the mythological and scientific explanations differ in language and context, the thematic parallels are striking. A universe born from silence, darkness, or emptiness into order and light. Could these ancient creation myths be intuitive reflections of cosmological truths, transmitted in the only language early humans had available, poetry and metaphor? The serpent and DNA, symbol or science. The serpent is a powerful symbol in myths across the globe. In the Bible, the snake represents temptation and knowledge. In Hinduism, Kundalini is a coiled serpent energy at the base of the spine that, when awakened, leads to enlightenment. In Mesoamerican cultures, Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, is a bringer of wisdom and civilization. Interestingly, the shape of the serpent mirrors the double helix of DNA. While it would be an overreach to suggest ancient people knew about DNA in the modern sense, the recurring use of serpentine symbols in context of life, transformation, and knowledge is provocative. It raises the possibility that myths encode deeper truths about the human body, mind, and spirit, truths only now being uncovered by modern science. Genetic memory and archetypes. Carl Jung believed that myths arise from the collective unconscious, shared symbols and archetypes inherited across generations. Modern science has begun to explore whether certain memories or traumas can be passed down genetically. Epigenetics shows that experiences can leave chemical marks on DNA, which may influence descendants' behavior or health. This suggests that some mythic themes, floods, fires, exiles, rebirths, may persist not just culturally, but biologically. They are not merely stories we tell, but imprints we carry. Myths, then, could be the narrative expression of inherited truths, warnings, wisdom, and wonder encoded in our very being. Myth as a scientific impulse. Science and myth may seem opposed, but they arise from the same human need to explain, to connect, to make sense of our place in the universe. Ancient people, without microscopes or telescopes, used story to explore the same mysteries we now approach with machines. Where science asks how, myth often asks why. Science observes the world. Myth gives that world meaning. But both are ways of mapping the unknown. And sometimes, as we've seen, they converge. Myths predict floods. Oral traditions point to meteor strikes. Ancient symbols reflect astronomical precision, bridging the divide. To treat myth as literal fact is to miss its poetic truth. But to dismiss myth entirely is to ignore humanity's earliest efforts to understand reality. As science evolves, it doesn't erase the mythic past, it reinterprets it. For example, the story of Prometheus stealing fire from the gods isn't just a tale of rebellion. It speaks to the human conquest of technology and the costs of progress. The myth of Icarus isn't merely a warning against flying too close to the sun. It captures the tension between ambition and humility. These stories endure not because they are factually accurate, but because they resonate with enduring truths about who we are. Stories and equations. In every age of humanity, we have sought to understand the world around us. In the beginning, we told stories about gods and monsters, floods and fire, stars and spirits. These stories became myths, and those myths became the foundations of civilizations. Later came another language of understanding. Science, built not from metaphor, but from measurement, not from symbols, but from systems. For a long time, the two seemed to exist in separate worlds, one rooted in imagination, the other in empirical proof. But this view is changing. Today, as science pushes into realms once reserved for the sacred, cosmology, consciousness, creation itself, we find that myths and science are not enemies. Instead, they are participants in a long, unfolding dialogue across time. One speaks in symbols, the other in equations. But both are trying to answer the same question: what is this world, and who are we within it? The nature of myth. To understand this dialogue, we must first understand what myth truly is. A myth is not a lie. In modern usage, we often treat the word myth as the opposite of truth, something false, debunked, or naive. But in its original sense, myth was a vessel for truth. Myths are symbolic narratives that express the deepest beliefs, fears, values, and wisdom of a culture. They help communities make sense of life, death, morality, nature, and the unknown. Think of the myth of Prometheus, who stole fire from the gods and gave it to humanity. It's not a historical account, but it is true in another sense. It reflects the human journey into knowledge, risk, rebellion, and the consequences of innovation. Likewise, the story of the Garden of Eden isn't a scientific report, but it speaks to timeless themes of innocence, knowledge, temptation, and the cost of self-awareness. Myths encode the emotional and spiritual truths of human existence. They are how ancient peoples organized the chaos of the world into meaning. But meaning is not static, and neither is myth. The nature of science. Science, on the other hand, is built on observation, repetition, and testing. Where myth asks why, science tends to ask how. Science does not rely on inherited tradition or poetic symbols. It requires evidence that can be verified by anyone, anywhere. This rigor has given us extraordinary breakthroughs, from medicine to astronomy, from genetics to geology. But science, too, is a human project. And like myth, it evolves. The truths of one generation are often replaced or revised by the discoveries of the next. Newtonian physics gave way to relativity and quantum mechanics. Once, we thought the Earth was the center of the universe. Now we know it's one planet among billions in a vast and expanding cosmos. While myth seeks to explain existence through narrative, science does so through discovery. Yet both emerge from the same impulse, a yearning to understand. The false dichotomy. In the modern world, we're often taught to choose sides. You either believe in myth or you believe in science. One is ancient, poetic, and irrational. The other is modern, logical, and testable. But this dichotomy is misleading. and increasingly, scholars, scientists, and philosophers are challenging it. The truth is, myth and science can enrich one another. Myths can guide the questions we ask. They can preserve the memory of real events, like floods or meteors, in symbolic form. They can express complex psychological and existential truths that science alone struggles to capture. Science, in turn, can uncover the natural phenomena that gave rise to myths, like eclipses, comets, or geological disasters, and help us interpret ancient narratives in new ways. Together, they offer a dialogue, not a debate. When the past echoes forward. One of the most compelling intersections between myth and science is the discovery that many myths preserve actual historical memories, sometimes across thousands of years. Consider the global flood myths, found in virtually every ancient culture. For a long time, these were viewed as religious metaphors. But modern geology has revealed multiple major flooding events at the end of the last ice age, when glaciers melted and sea levels rose dramatically. Archaeologists have even found submerged structures beneath seas and lakes, evidence of ancient settlements that were once above water. Similarly, myths of fire from the sky found in North American indigenous traditions are now being investigated in relation to possible comet strikes or meteor impacts around 12,000 years ago, events which may have contributed to climate shifts and mass extinctions. These stories, long dismissed as fantasy, may hold fragments of real, observable events, if we are willing to listen to them through the lens of both memory and science. The cosmos in myth. The stars have always fascinated humans, and myths are filled with celestial symbolism. The Greeks saw gods in the constellations. The Maya built entire cities aligned with the movements of Venus. The Egyptians oriented their pyramids to match the stars in Orion's belt. Modern science has revealed that many of these ancient societies possessed surprisingly advanced astronomical knowledge. They tracked planetary orbits, predicted eclipses, and understood solstices and equinoxes, all without telescopes. This knowledge was encoded not in textbooks, but in stories, rituals, and architecture. Science helps us decode these myths. Myth helps us recognize that our ancestors were not primitive, but perceptive. They saw patterns in the sky and connected them to patterns in life, a connection we are only now beginning to appreciate again. Myth and the inner universe. While science explores the external world, myth often explores the internal one. Myths deal with love, jealousy, ambition, betrayal, sacrifice, rebirth, universal human experiences. This is why the same archetypes appear in myths across cultures. The hero's journey, the wise old mentor, the trickster, the fall from grace. Carl Jung called these archetypes of the collective unconscious, patterns of thought and behavior that are inherited across generations. Today, neuroscience and psychology are exploring how much of our behavior is shaped by subconscious instincts. Even epigenetics shows that trauma and experience can be passed down through generations. In this way, science is beginning to confirm what myth has always expressed, that human beings are shaped not only by our environment, but by the deep stories running through us, stories older than memory, encoded in both mind and body. The creation of the world. Most cultures have a creation myth, an account of how the world began. Some describe the universe emerging from chaos, water, or a cosmic egg. Others describe it being spoken into existence, or born from divine union. Today, science offers its own creation story, the Big Bang. According to this theory, the universe began as a singularity, an infinitely dense point that exploded outward in a burst of energy, giving rise to matter, time, and space. At first glance, these stories seem incompatible. But look closer. Many creation myths describe an initial void or darkness, followed by a burst of light. They speak of a primal sound, like Om, or of divine speech, like let there be light. The Big Bang, too, begins with energy, light, and the birth of form from formlessness. Of course, myth and physics use different languages, but the resonance between them suggests that myths may be intuitive reflections of cosmic truths, glimpses of understanding shaped into poetry by people who lack telescopes, but not wonder. The sacred serpent and the double helix. The serpent is one of the oldest and most powerful mythological symbols. It appears in the Garden of Eden, in the Kundalini of Indian yoga, in Mesoamerican feathered serpent gods, and in the staff of Asclepius, the ancient symbol of healing. Why the serpent? Some researchers have noted the serpent's visual similarity to the double helix of DNA. While it's unlikely that ancient people knew about genetics in the modern sense, they may have recognized the serpent as a symbol of life, transformation, and hidden knowledge. Indeed, the myths are consistent. Serpents guard sacred knowledge, represent healing and rebirth, and often dwell at the threshold between worlds. As science uncovers the biological codes of life, and myth continues to reveal the spiritual patterns of transformation, we see again how these two traditions speak to the same mysteries in different dialects. Reason and reverence. In many ways, science brings clarity. It explains the mechanisms of the world, how water becomes vapor, how stars form, how cells divide. But in doing so, it often strips away the sense of awe. Myth does the opposite. It restores wonder. It does not explain the sun's nuclear reactions. It says the sun is a god who rides across the sky in a chariot. It may not be scientifically accurate, but it is spiritually resonant. It reconnects us with the sacredness of life, the beauty of mystery, and the humility that comes with not knowing everything. Together, science and myth offer a full picture. One tells us how the world works. The other reminds us that it matters. A shared journey. When myths meet science, we don't find one replacing the other. We find a dialogue across time. Myths are the whispers of our ancestors, carried through ritual, story, and song. Science is the voice of modern inquiry, grounded in evidence and exploration. Together, they form a tapestry that is richer than either alone. We need both. Science without myth can become cold and arrogant, forgetting the mystery at the heart of existence. Myth without science can become dogmatic, trapped in symbols that no longer serve. But when they speak together, when reason and reverence join hands, we find not just knowledge, but wisdom. The stars we study with telescopes are the same stars our ancestors watched with wonder. The atoms we break apart in labs were once seen as divine breath. The questions we ask, who are we? Where did we come from? What does it mean, are ancient? And so, the dialogue continues. Across time, across cultures, across generations, myth and science continue to meet, to clash, to intertwine, inviting us not to choose sides, but to listen more deeply, and to see the world with both clarity and awe. Thanks for joining us on this journey through the space where myth and science intertwine. If today's exploration sparked new questions or challenged old beliefs, that's exactly the point. Because the deeper we dig, the more we realize that myths aren't always fantasy, and science doesn't always have all the answers. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more mind-opening content. Drop your thoughts in the comments. What myths do you think hold hidden truths? Until next time, keep questioning, keep wondering, and remember, sometimes the oldest stories hold the keys to our most modern mysteries.